Hello and welcome to Standard Issue, Nancy Harris. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to start by saying big congratulations. Just got a Bafta nomination in the Best Writer for Comedy category. How does that feel?
Like mind blowing, to be honest. I didn't expect it at all because the show has had quite a low profile in a way.
Mm.
Here it was on BritBox and it's an Irish made show, and BritBox and RTE, the Irish channel, and I don't know, I just didn't expect it. I didn't know that it had that impact. So it's just lovely. It's so wonderful. I'm thrilled.
Yeah, without wanting to do BritBox down, obviously, BBC and Channel 4 tends to dominate those categories year after year after year. So I was delighted when I saw that you were on there, but I have to say I was a little bit surprised too.
It's not like it's a show that there was lots of other shows of the same type on BritBox. It was sort of
Mm.
there on its own as a comedy drama. And so that was the other thing, is you tend to find things when you go, oh, that was on that streamer, and maybe they'll make something else that's a
Mm.
bit similar. And I felt like The Dry was its own thing. It sat kind of on its own on BritBox, but I was thrilled that they made it and that they came in and they were so behind it, which they really were. Now it's on ITVX, so it's under ITVX's umbrella now.
Everyone should definitely watch it. Now it's more widely available. Now, there's actually a lot of Irish women in the BAFTA category. Sharon
There's
Horgan's in
three.
there, Lisa McGee, and also she's second generation Irish, but Barunca O'Shaughnessy is also in there as well
Yes,
for
from
Motherland.
Motherland. Yeah.
Is this the Sharon Horgan effect, do you think? Has she made a difference to
Oh,
writing?
I think she has. I mean, she's amazing. I just think she's incredible. Whether it's the Sharon Horgan effect or whether it's that people have caught on to a certain type of humor, I don't know. But I think she's amazing. And I'm a big fan.
This is actually your first thing that you've written for television, isn't it?
First thing I've created and written. Yeah.
Now, when I wrote a review of it, I said it was beautifully written, which you can take credit for, that it was beautifully acted and it was beautifully soundtracked. Did you have any say in those second two, in the casting and in the soundtrack?
Yes, I did, because I was the exec producer on it. So you get approved, you come in,
Mm.
like you're in constant conversation about particularly casting, because this show took 8 years to get made. So when
Wow.
you've lived with something for that long, it just was really important that myself and the director, Paddy Burnock, had a very similar view on how those characters came across. And so the casting was kind of key. I think that was something I probably had a big say on. But the soundtrack is amazing as well. It's
Mm.
Circa Richardson and Neve Break, amazing Irish singer-songwriters.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely
Yeah.
loved it. Yeah, I went straight on Spotify.
Yeah. That's great.
You also get 8 episodes rather than the conventional six that you do get
Yes.
generally with the Beeb and more often than not with Channel 4. That does give the story a bit more space to breathe.
It does. It does. I think it takes it out of the classic just comedy, which
Mm.
tends to be six. And it does. I mean, now I kind of don't know how you'd fit all the story into six, because it was kind of, we were wavering. Would we do six? Would we do eight? And I just felt eight gave us a bit more breath, because really, while it does center on Shiv, the recovering alcoholic, it was always intended to be a family show that had where every single person in the family has an arc. And that would be really hard to do, I think, in six episodes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
I genuinely loved Bernie, who is Pom Boyd, who is
She's
your main
amazing.
character's mum, and I feel like that would what would be missing if you had to have 6 episodes. That would be, she would have less to do because of just time restrictions, and yet she's just been made redundant, so she's got this sort of general feeling of malaise that happens to people. Then she's also really interesting because they do to her, I have to say, what my family is guilty of doing to my mum, which is to kind of make her a sort of a figure of fun within the family. And then also she gets this brilliant storyline about her next door neighbour, which I knew she was right. I knew she was right. And yet I knew if that was my mum, I would be doing what her kids were doing and
What they're
saying,
doing.
yeah, absolutely. So I thought that was really cleverly done.
That was really important to me, that she was right, because she has been sort of forgotten. But she's tough. She's the tough one on Shiv. That relationship between the two of them is an interesting, because that was sort of the dynamic of, in my own family, there's obviously, that what would draw me to write about something like this is there's alcoholism and luckily recovery, sobriety in my
Yeah.
family. So immediate family and extended family is what I mean when I say family. But within a large family, you get that kind of sense of, are they really an alcoholic? Or is it that they've just made a mess of their life?
Yeah.
And, and that feels very much Bernie's judgment of Shiv. Is that like, well, is this the new thing now? She's an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And also Bernie's own drinking is being highlighted constantly, subtly in the show. And so it's sort of like, when somebody holds a mirror up to us, do we become defensive about it? So
Yeah.
she's harder on Shiv than anyone else. And yet she herself has quite a hard, a lonely story of her own.
Mm.
So it's trying to get those relationships really rounded so that you both felt for Bernie, but could see how tough she was on Shiv, could see that there was stuff going on for her too. All that felt like rich territory, but what we have to really carefully navigate in a show like this, I think.
Yeah. So let's start with the alcoholism. What drew you to that as a plot line? Because we were just talking off mic, but everybody who listens to this will know my dad was an alcoholic, and everybody's experience of it is different. But at the same point, certain things are true for everyone. And so that seems a bit of a thankless task, writing about alcoholism, because it seems like a lot of people will say, well, that's absolutely not what it was like for me. Whereas I would say, I think, that's absolutely not what it was like for me, because it wasn't my sibling, it was my father. But that said, the universal truths, I think you got absolutely correct. The least of which of being is just one day, can't this just be about me? Why does it always have to be about this other person?
So that is actually what drew me to the subject. So I'm from a family, immediate and extended, where there's quite a few people sober. And my grandparents' generation, who were very Catholic, very conservative, they didn't believe in sex before marriage. They went to mass every Sunday. They didn't believe in divorce. They were big, big drinkers. Mm-hmm. And quite a few of their children got sober and some went into recovery. The interesting thing is not everybody got sober in the same way. So even within the amount of people that are sober, there is kind of not tension, but there's disagreement on what sobriety takes. So some people in the family, for instance, really embraced the recovery model, the 12 steps, went down that route. Other people were like, you don't need to be doing that. Just give up. Give up, problem is solved. And the recovery people were like, well, no, because you give up and then you have to feel the feelings and you've got to look at what you did and the shame and the lies. That's only the beginning. And the people that had given up just kind of went, well, you just want to go into a room and make a big song and dance out of it and talk about yourselves. And so there was kind of this disagreement in among the people that were sober about what sobriety was. And then there was this kind of tension between my grandparents, who were big drinkers, and their children, who were suddenly looking at the way they were drinking, the way their parents' generation had drunk, and thinking actually just drinking in general we're not healthy drinkers in our families. So I grew up with that kind of in the generation above me. And then I've had kind of a lot of dealings with addiction, when I've had relationships with people in active addiction and friends in addiction. And so it just sort of was something that came up in different ways. And as you say, nobody's had the same experience of it. But what it felt to me was that it was always examined dramatically in the same way. And I felt there was probably a richer way to look at the subject, not just from the perspective of somebody trying to get sober, but also from all of the people around them who are affected directly and indirectly by it.
Yeah.
And even beyond drinking, there's a family with a sadness that they're not talking about.
Absolutely.
It was like what's under the drinking was also something I was interested in. So it began with the sort of it's not autobiographical, I feel crucial to say, but it began with that kind of personal experience. And then I was like, well, how can I develop that and look at all the different ways this affects people, truthfully?
Because when we arrive within the family, we arrive at a funeral and, we sort of drop straight in. And we have our main character, Shiv, who's saying she's given up drinking. And you might look at her family at that point and think they're being quite harsh to her,
Yeah.
But as it goes on, more and more is revealed. And of course, there's backstory. They've reasons not to trust her. They've reasons to roll their eyes to heaven. They've reasons to resent her. There's a beautiful scene where her sister unleashes on her about all the money that she's had off her over the years and never seen again. And like I say, it's hard with those because you have to try and let that stuff go. But also sometimes it really riles you. And sometimes you just have to say, okay, let's do a list of the things, of the reasons that I'm still absolutely furious with you, that I've never had an apology for. So mostly because you can't remember a huge amount of them, which,
Yeah. But as you point out, you know, it was interesting because I was like, how could I get the story of how difficult it is to try and get sober, which it really is. It's a huge
Mm,
thing. And I've often gravitated to people who are sober because I think they look at themselves, they've done all the work of the dark night of the soul. They're some of the wisest people you
yeah,
know because they've really done that soul searching and they've looked at themselves truthfully. So I wanted to show that journey, but I also went, and I know this from experience, that when you're in a family with somebody, even if they get sober, sometimes it's just you never get the attention. And I felt like those siblings,
yeah,
even if she's the black sheep, she's still, everyone in the family is still focused on her.
yeah.
And you've got the sister that's trying to do everything perfectly and never getting any attention. And so I just thought those things are really rich. Like, how can you tell it from everyone's perspective, actually? Show that the really difficult thing of getting sober, but also the really difficult thing of being a sibling of somebody who has an addiction.
Yeah. And of course, all that stuff you say about people who've done the work, that is quite terrifying because even if you're not an alcoholic, the idea that for anyone to look at themselves in a really sort of scathing way, it
Absolutely.
scares us all. Yeah.
It's terrifying to what is the truth of yourself. And these are people that have really done that work, that have looked at everything they've done, have taken responsibility. It's an extraordinary, I think, a very brave thing to do.
Yeah. How do you feel about Shiv? How do you want us to feel about Shiv? I obviously went through moments of really liking her, really resenting her, to pitying her. And then I think, have you ever seen The Station Agent?
No.
It's a film with Peter Dinklage in, and he's living in a small town, so he stands out obviously because he's a dwarf. And there's a scene where he gets drunk in a pub and then stands up on a chair and starts shouting, "Everybody, look at me!" You die inside every time you see it because it's so terrible. And I have to say, you have a moment in this. Shiv has a moment in this where I was just like, oh, I think I might vomit. My guts are churning so much at watching this. So at that point, yeah, I was really confused. I kind of hated her. I kind of pitied her. How do you feel about her? How do you want us to feel about her?
I think exactly what you've just said. I mean, I think it's an extraordinary performance by Roisin Gallagher.
Mm,
She's an amazing actress, and I think she navigated because I don't think it's your typical alcoholic. I mean, I think one of the interesting, and by that I mean what we typically associate with the
yeah,
idea of alcoholic and
yeah,
versus calm, in that I think Shiv's quite a sensitive person, and
yes,
she's clearly used alcohol as a way of navigating her life. But she's infuriated. I mean, the things that what I wanted to do was show how just because she's given up the substance doesn't mean the addictive part of her is gone. And really, that was activated by the ex, and how quickly she will look for that high or look for that escape, and how that's always, you know, when you have an addiction. I know this from lots of people, and I can even understand it even in myself. Of you, when you give up one thing, you're like, well, what else can I replace it with? You know, she comes home really in probably recovery terms to the worst place she could go, which is to her family, and then and can't cope with them, and is trying to stay off the drink, and so this kind of ex arrives and the interesting thing about him is while initially you're like, oh God, he is kind to her at moments. He offers her things. And so it's kind of taking those crumbs. So I wanted to show you both had empathy, but infuriated. And she does some quite questionable things, like morally,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, she really does. She's not even
Yeah.
drunk then, so you can't even say. But then again, is being drunk an excuse? It does ask a lot of interesting questions.
Yes. And they're both doing, I think they're both in an addictive relationship because he's trying to escape responsibility and she's trying to escape her family. So that's really, if you think of addiction as escape,
Mm.
then that is what they're doing.
Yeah, a sort of generational divide between the generation, let's my generation, say Generation X, which is open to ideas of like therapy or different ways of eating, different ways of looking after yourself, and that sort of brick wall of this is nonsense. That I can remember trying to persuade my mum once that she should go to counselling after my dad died. And it was like I'd said, you should go and see a witch doctor. It was insane to her. She was just like, what are you talking about? Why would I do that? And I think that's done really well in this. And I do wonder, is Ireland more open to that sort of stuff or are we more open to it here? I don't know.
I suspect Ireland is a little bit more open to it than here because I think here, I've lived here for quite a while, like over 10 years. And so I think there's a skepticism here about psychoanalyzing
Yeah,
things too much. And there's a, there is that kind of traditional. I mean, I think people, of course, are open to it, but I think they're a little bit more. But there is still that skepticism, and I do think there is a generational divide between my generation, the younger generation, who are really open to kind of everything, almost to the point where you're like, are you going to be open to literally everything?
Yeah.
And that kind of generation that's like, you know what, talking about yourself is not, it's not going to help.
Yeah.
That she says it in the show, like, what do they do in these meetings? Just go sit in a room and talk about themselves.
Yeah.
And I think I've heard that in real life.
Because it's interesting, because my grandparents were Irish, so there's quite a lot of stuff that my parents will do that I would describe as Irish. Like being very, very sort of skeptical about that stuff, being really secretive, those things. But of course, Ireland itself has moved on, and they're sort of they've got the sort of Irishness that came over with their parents when they came over, which is an interesting thing, I think.
Yeah, I think it has moved on, and I think actually I've been really interested in how much people have wanted to have this conversation in Ireland about drinking. Because I think even our attitudes to drinking in Ireland has really changed. I know quite a lot of people that just have decided to stop drinking so much. But I still think there's that kind of generational sort of nervousness about addiction as a label. I think we still regard an addict as something other, as something extreme, as something not of our world. And actually one of the kind of surprising things was, one critic said she didn't look like an alcoholic. And the point of the show was, we don't actually know what an alcoholic looks like. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, but isn't that not what we're trying to say from the very beginning? Like, they even say to her, you don't look like an alcoholic. And so, but I thought, well, obviously that is something that is not, people still don't really know. And there is kind of comedy in that idea, actually. A lot of people, both alcoholic, sober and not, none of them look the same. You'd never look at them in a room and necessarily say he looks like an alcoholic.
Yeah, exactly that. I've got a friend who fell off the wagon after 20 years. 20 years he'd been successfully straight. And if people hadn't known the story of what he was before and then saw what happened to him afterwards, they'd have been like, what the hell has happened?
And did he go straight back drinking? Like, was he just on the lash?
His was drugs, but yes, and it did not end well. And yeah, after 20 years. So it's always there. It's always a risk. You are never fully recovered. I think that's another point.
Which is an extraordinary thing to have to live with every day.
Yeah.
That every single day you're making a choice not to do something.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary thing. I mean, it's a huge, if you're not somebody doing that, you might forget how hard that could be.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
20 years. It's not just in you. It's still an active choice not to use.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. I have to say, it's one of the reasons that I'm really glad that alcohol just stopped agreeing with me at some point in my 30s. And I just thought, here's a blessing.
And I think that's a lot of people. I think a lot of people have that experience where you just, if you're lucky.
If you're lucky, yeah. Yeah, because I've got a pretty high percentage chance of becoming an alcoholic. It's once you've grown up.
Well, you were saying that
house.
saying before we went on air that's when it's in your family, drinking is never neutral, really.
Yeah, not at all. Are we going to have more, Nancy? Is there a series 2 on the way?
There is a series 2. So we're actually we're about a month away from filming.
Oh,
and so so I'm in frantic rewrite mode. But so it's developing on. I mean, it was kind of easy to have a series 2 because in my brain I had all the stories, but it feels like it probably opens up a little bit wider across the family. You start to get to see them all a bit more.
Great, yeah. There's some lovely little side characters there. I'd like to see more of.
Some nice side characters, and then there's some interesting stuff about what happens if more than one member is trying to stay sober.
Yeah, interesting. Brilliant. Are you going back to the theatre at all at any point?
I am going back to the theatre. I'm hoping to have a play in Dublin, unfortunately not London this year, for the Theatre Festival, but it hasn't been officially announced, so I can't quite say anything yet, but I'm hoping to go back theatre. But actually, television writing, because I write all the episodes, it's really all consuming. It feels like it almost seems like you're doing nothing else. And you're like, I am doing other things.
Yeah.
But I just feel very lucky, Hannah, to be doing this because it did take 8 years. It wasn't an easy show to get made. We didn't have a big streamer behind us. So we had to have the Irish Channel and a co-production. And so it's just so I'm just so thrilled that it's out there with a beautiful cast. And I think Paddy Burnett, the director, has done a gorgeous job. He's a brilliant director and he just made it feel really real.
Yeah.
But he kept the comedy there as well, which was lovely.
What I have to say is, and again, I think I said this when I wrote a review, is it deals with really high drama issues in a really low drama way. I only want to watch television that's like that, to be honest.
That's exactly that isn't kind of, and I think that can be a hard tone to write, and it can be a very hard tone to direct because it
Mm.
means you have to keep everybody's performance at the same level.
Yeah,
And I think that was something that we were like really conscious of how do you have a show that is about something very serious, but it is humorous. So, because I just didn't want to be making a show that was so depressing. So what you wanted to have fun and light, but actually
yeah,
was saying proper things.
yeah,
And so we talked a lot about how do you navigate the really dark stuff along with some of the more absurd light stuff.
yeah,
Because that's what I gravitate to as well.
yeah. Well, you
Um,
hit the nail on the head there.
thank you.
When do you find out about the BAFTA? When's that?
BAFTA is on Sunday night, is the BAFTA craft.
This Sunday.
This Sunday.
Oh, wow.
So
I'm going to
craft
say
award.
something that you don't have to agree with. It's something that Sally Wainwright said to me a long time ago, which was that she doesn't agree that the writers end up at the craft awards when everybody else, the director and the producers and the actors, they all get to go to the big one, and the
I
writer,
know.
without whom none of this would be possible, is over in a specialist one. And hopefully one day you'll all get invited to the right ceremony.
Yeah, I wonder why. Is it just to keep the hours down or something? But
I think so. I think so, and
I think it is.
I think they think that they won't recognise the writers, so it's not like a famous face. But actually, increasingly, Sally Wainwright, Sharon Horgan, people know who they are,
People
and
know, yeah, yeah,
people
they
want to hear
do.
them do a speech because they're all really funny women.
Yeah, that is true. Well, I'm looking forward. I mean, look, it's a night out, which I don't get very often. So I'm delighted and an excuse to wear a dress and get your hair blow dried. So there,
Well, lots of luck.
yeah, thanks, Anna.